Welcome to Anime Recaps. In this video, we will explain School Babysitters. This anime tells a story of a high schooler who is forced to work at a daycare center for his younger brother. Instead of being sad because he had to live only with his little brother, his life was filled with people who loved him both at school and the daycare center. How was his life at the daycare center with his little brother? Let's find out in School Babysitters. School Babysitters begins by showing Ryuuichi Kashima, a high school student walking to school while holding his younger brother Kotarou Kashima. Ryuuichi and Kotarou apparently just lost their parents, who died in a plane crash. Even they have no relatives. Fortunately, Youko Morinomiya, an academy head who recently lost a child and husband, offers to become Ryuuichi and Kotarou's guardian. She would allow Ryuuichi to transfer to the school. Ryuuichi and Kotarou arrived at the door of Morinomiya's office, and since this was their first meeting, Ryuuichi was determined to say hello and offer his condolences. However, the plan did not go well as Morinomiya immediately reprimanded him as soon as he entered the office. Not to mention that Kotarou made fun of Morinomiya's hair. After learning that Ryuuichi has looked after Kotarou since he was a baby, Morinomiya assigns him to work at the school's daycare center to pay his living expenses. She insists that everyone must work to live. She then assigned her assistant, Keigo Saikawa, to take Ryuuichi to the daycare center. On the way to the daycare center, Saikawa explained that the daycare center was actually a club and child care for the employees at the school. However, due to a lack of funds, the daycare center used club member students to work as babysitters, which did not last long and ended with all the club members deciding to leave. Saikawa then says that Ryuichi's job is to look after the babies in the daycare and find new students to join as club members. Arriving at the daycare center, Ryuichi met Yoshihito Usaida, the babysitter, sleeping at the time. Usaida then introduced the children who were members of the daycare center. There is Taka Kamitani, the twins Kazuma and Takuma Mamizuka, Kirin Kumatsuka, and the baby Midori Sawatari. Although the children are afraid at first to see Ryuichi, they quickly become friends and even immediately flock to him. Kotarou saw his older brother playing with the other children and chose to stop and read a book. He didn't seem able to get along with the other kids. Even Kotarou refuses when Usaida offers to read a book to him. Fast forward, Usaida's working hours are over. He asked permission to go home and requested Ryuichi to keep watch over the children until they were picked up by their respective parents. When the children's mother came to pick them up, Ryuichi introduced himself to them. But among the children, only Taka has not been picked up. Sometime later, Taka's older brother, Hayato Kamitani, came to pick Taka up and said their mother was still working. There was a commotion because Taka refused to go home with Hayato and insisted on playing with Ryuichi. This irritated Hayato, and he told Ryuichi why he didn't just play with his younger brother. It was then that Ryuichi saw Kotarou, who was still reading a book by himself. As Ryuichi approached Kotarou, his younger brother suddenly fainted. Ryuichi panicked and asked Hayato to help bring Kotarou to the clinic. Hayato left Taka with his mother, who was still working in the office, and rushed to take Kotarou to the school clinic. Upon arrival at the clinic, the doctor confirmed that Kotarou was fine and just stressed. Then a nurse asked Ryuichi to let his young brother sleep in the clinic, and she would tell him when their parents came. Ryuichi was waiting for Kotarou outside the clinic and was about to tell his brother's condition to his father. It was then that Ryuichi realized that his parents had died, and he burst into tears. While Ryuichi was crying, Morinomiya suddenly came and said she was grateful that he finally cried too. The reason is that since the funeral of his parents, Ryuichi still hasn't cried. But apparently, it's not just Ryuichi who is crying, because when they entered the clinic, Kotarou was already awake and was sobbing, looking for his brother. They finally went home and slept together. While Ryuichi and Kotarou were sleeping, Morinomiya seemed to caress them affectionately. Morinomiya apparently has great affection for Ryuichi and Kotarou. The next day, although Morinomiya was angry at first, she did not remove the flower Ryuichi had given her from her desk. She remained firm and woke him at 5 a.m. to prepare for school and look after the daycare. She made it clear that she didn't like people wasting time. Kotarou has begun to get along with other children at the daycare center. Meanwhile, Ryuichi feels awkward because he is wearing the new school uniform given to him by Morinomiya. When it was time for class, Ryuichi ordered Kotarou to wake Usaida up if he needed anything. Then Ryuichi went to school. In the school hallway, Ryuichi felt even more clumsy as his friends kept staring at him. Hayato, who runs into him, says they saw Ryuichi because Kotarou and the other daycare kids apparently followed him to school. They forcefully invite Ryuichi to play and create a commotion in the corridor, which attracts the attention of a female student, Maria Inomata. Maria seems irritated by the commotion and asks why Ryuichi is bringing the children to school. Seeing the angry Maria, the children were frightened until finally Ryuichi and Hayato took them back to the daycare center. On the other hand, Maria runs into Taka's mother, who asks for help to deliver lunch to the daycare center. Maria had no choice but to come to the daycare center, where again, the children were frightened to see her. While Usaida even admitted that he had a stomachache and asked Hayato to take him to the school clinic, he asks Maria and Ryuichi to look after the children while Usaida is away. Ryuichi noticed the children's fear of Maria and asked her to return to class. However, Maria reasoned that she had the responsibility of Usaida to help look after the children while she was checking herself. Then, even though it looks scary, Maria secretly wants to hold Midori. Unfortunately, Maria instead yelled at Midori, which made the baby cry, and the other children intended to attack her. Then, Maria vented her jealousy towards Ryuichi, who could interact with many people, in contrast to her, who can only study and even feel lonely. Maria burst into tears, which touched the hearts of the daycare children, and they hugged her to cry together. They fell asleep together in the daycare room. Meanwhile, when checking Usaida's condition at the school clinic, Hayato said the babysitter was just pretending to have a stomachache. The scene changes in the daycare room after the children and Maria wake up from their nap. Taka taunts Kotarou, wearing a tiger shirt even though he has never seen a tiger before. In the end, Ryuichi promised to take Kotarou to the zoo, even though he didn't have any money. The invitation seemed to invite reactions from other children who wanted to go to the zoo. At first, Ryuichi refuses and says they should go with their respective parents, but Usaida convinces him they can go together so he gets extra overtime, which can later be used as supplies at the zoo. On the other hand, Taka and Hayato actually argue until Taka says he hates his brother. After school, Ryuichi asks Morinomiya for permission to take Kotarou and the other daycare kids to the zoo. She allows him but refuses to provide overtime pay for Usaida. However, the next day when Ryuichi and Kotarou were ready to go to the zoo, Saikawa instead gave Ryuichi food supplies and money that could be used at the zoo later. Long story short, Ryuichi goes to the zoo with Usaida and the other kids, and Taka and Hayato come after. They have fun at the zoo. While the other children were frightened by the sight of the tiger, Kotarou didn't seem to be running away. But when Ryuichi approached him, his younger brother immediately burst into tears of fear. After that, they ate together with the lunch prepared by Saikawa. Ryuichi was sad to see another family with their parents, but he was reassured. When going home from the zoo, Taka follows a man he thinks is Hayato. Finally, he realized that the man was not his older brother and was lost. The zoo was about to close because it was getting late. Taka was scared and cried while calling his older brother. Hayato, who was frantically looking for his younger brother, heard Taka's voice, finally meeting again. While being carried by Hayato, Taka said that he didn't hate him. The scene moves to Valentine's Day. There is a rule against exchanging chocolates at school, but most students ignore this rule and keep exchanging chocolates. Tomoya Yagi and Shukichi Nezu are the two most famous male students in Ryuichi's class who get a lot of chocolate, making Maria irritated with them. Maria's annoyance increases when she learns that Tomoya intends to join the daycare club. Meanwhile, Maria could not join because the daycare children were still afraid of her. Tomoya tells Ryuichi of his intentions during school break, and he is accepted into the club. But while in the library, Maria hears the whispers of other students about Tomoya's strange and scary behavior when he is with small children. This worries Maria, so she rushes to the daycare club. Sure enough, Tomoya was having a nosebleed at the club after touching Kotarou's cheek. Shukichi, who joined the club, accused Tomoya of being a pervert because he thought normal people wouldn't have nosebleeds just because they were close to small children. Hearing this, Ryuichi decided to expel Tomoya from the club. Meanwhile, on the other hand, the children who knew it was Valentine's Day asked Ryuichi and Usaida for chocolate. After school, Ryuichi took the time to buy some chocolate, which he gave to Maria. She was so touched that she decided to buy chocolate for the daycare children too. The scene changes again during gym class, where Usaida apparently takes the children to the field to meet Ryuichi. At that time, Ryuichi advised them not to approach strangers, as there were rumors of dangerous people on the loose. One of the twins, Takuma, unexpectedly slipped to the sidelines and met a foreign man wearing a hat and face covering. Hayato, who saw this, panicked and threw shoes at the person until he fainted. After awakening from the faint, it was revealed that the person was Kosuke Mamizuka, a famous actor and the father of Takuma and Kazuma. Kosuke had just gotten a day off from work, so he came to play with his kids at the daycare. But to avoid the fans, he was forced to wear a hat and face covering. Unfortunately, Kosuke's desire to play with his two children could not be achieved because Takuma and Kazuma were afraid and avoided him. Ryuichi finally helps by providing encouragement so that the father Kosuke and his kids' relationship becomes closer. When it was school time, Kosuke intended to sneak out and go home. Unfortunately, he collided with a female student, which exposed his cover, and he was swarmed by fans. Luckily, at that time, Kosuke's wife, a gym teacher, Umi Mamizuka, came to the rescue and asked the students to return to class. Umi explains that their children are afraid of Kosuke because they often watch his movies, where he plays the villain. But after they played together in daycare, Takuma and Kazuma were no longer afraid of their father and immediately hugged him. The next day, Ryuichi intends to post flyers searching for new members. Unfortunately, the bulletin board was full of leaflets from other clubs, so he canceled his plans. At the daycare club, Ryuichi tells Usaida about his efforts to recruit new members. Usaida then suggested that they look at other clubs to understand how they recruited. Ryuichi agrees and looks around the club with Usaida and the daycare kids. While viewing the drama club, they meet Kirin's mother, Yayoi Kumatsuka, who offers Ryuichi to join the drama club. Then they went to the cooking club, where Maria immediately scolded Ryuichi for bringing the children into the kitchen. Maria's attitude makes her club friends realize that she has a kind heart and worries about the safety of the daycare children. After being asked to leave, Taka cries because he asks for a cake made by Maria in the cooking club. However, Ryuichi insists on taking Taka out to see the sports club. In the sports club, Hayato seems to dislike Taka's presence. After looking around the club, Ryuichi feels sad because he can't join the club he wants and has to be at the daycare club. Even so, he kept trying to put up a new recruiting flyer. He was surprised by Hayato, who suddenly came to join the daycare club. Apparently, Kotarou pulled Hayato's pants earlier and asked him to join. At the same time, the daycare children came with a cake from Maria. They then enjoyed the cake together. The next day, Ryuichi felt very heavy and weak. Sure enough, he was apparently sick. Morinomiya asks Kotarou not to sleep in the room with his older brother and takes him to the kitchen to help make hot drinks and food. Despite the difficulties, Kotarou still helps Morinomiya squeeze the lemon for the drink. Ryuichi, who had a fever, had a dream when his parents were about to leave for the plane. By that time, they brought Kotarou, so Ryuichi was alone. Unknowingly, Ryuichi was crying in his sleep, making Kotarou, who came to bring food, cry too. When he wakes up and sees Kotarou, Ryuichi feels lucky that at least he has a younger brother. The scene changes one morning at the daycare club. Ryuichi arrived too early in the day, so there were only him, Kotarou, and Midori at the daycare center. While changing Midori's diaper, a second-grade high school student suddenly came and looked for Midori. Before Ryuichi could introduce the man who appeared to be Hiroyuki Inui to Midori, he was already furious at the smell of the diaper. Then Ryuichi asks why he is looking for Midori, and Hiroyuki explains that he is Midori's future father. Ryuichi is surprised to learn that Midori's mother, Yukari Sawatari, already has a husband. But Hiroyuki insists that he likes Yukari and will take the place of her husband who never comes home. That made Ryuichi think. After Hiroyuki left the daycare center and Usaida came to the daycare, Ryuichi still daydreamed that Midori's mother, Yukari, had an affair. In the end, he explained this to Usaida, to which he responded casually. He instead says that Ryuichi will never understand love and infidelity because he has never been in love. Ryuichi becomes even more thoughtful, especially when he runs into Maria and asks her opinion on the affair. She gets angry and insists that cheating deserves punishment. During recess, Ryuichi returned to the daycare club and saw Hiroyuki playing with the other children. Meanwhile, Kotarou, who had been asking Ryuichi to read him a book, was still ignored by his older brother. Yukari came to the club to pick up Midori because she had left early. Hiroyuki was immediately happy to meet her and intended to confess his feelings. But right at that moment, Midori burst into tears, which caught Yukari's attention and cancelled Hiroyuki's plans to confess. After calming her daughter down, Yukari explained that her husband, Yuraka Sawatari, who worked in Turkey for a long time, would soon return. Hearing this, Hiroyuki could only remain silent and realized that he had misunderstood his relationship with Yukari. Ryuichi was relieved that there was actually no cheating affair, and he ended up taking the time to read a book to Kotarou. The scene moves to a small house inhabited by Chukichi and his younger siblings. After arguing with each other, one of Chukichi's younger brothers suddenly ran away. On the other hand, Kotarou played in the yard while Ryuichi was drying clothes when he saw a boy trapped in the bushes. Kotarou calls out Ryuuichi, who immediately recognizes the boy as Kichi's younger brother. While trying to help him, Kichi even refused. Ryuuichi intended to call Kichi, but he called Tomoya since he didn't have his number. Tomoya came with Maria, and he immediately teased Kotarou to the point that he had a nosebleed. When Maria scolded Kichi, who ran away, Tomoya told Ryuuichi that Kichi was working part-time. Kichi apparently has to work part-time to help support his 8 younger siblings. Kichi pours out his heart about how he doesn't want to live in poverty. Despite loving his family, Kichi really hates their situation. He is jealous because his friends have video games. Tomoya, who heard Kichi's outpouring of his heart, told Kichi's childhood, where he was the only child in the class who did not have video games. But he was never discouraged and instead made his own fun toy. Tomoya's story touched Kichi's heart, especially when Kichi came to pick him up not long after. He brought a cake and a video game that Kichi really wanted. The next day at school, Ryuuichi asked permission not to come to the daycare club that day because he would write a report in class. He asked Usaida to take his place to look after the children. But because Ryuuichi was in a hurry, he missed his lunch. At first, Usaida intended to deliver the lunch with the other children after they all had lunch, but Kotarou insisted on delivering the lunch alone. Although heavy-hearted and a little worried, Usaida allows him to leave. Down the school hallway, Kotarou, walking alone, caught the attention of the other students, especially when he refuses their help and insists that he will deliver the lunch himself. On the other hand, a man was observing Kotarou. The man appears to be Hiroyuki, who got the lure of a photo of Midori and Yukari from Usaida if he followed Kotarou while delivering lunch. In the classroom, Ryuuichi noticed that he had left his lunchbox behind. When he was about to go to the daycare center to pick up the lunch, one of his beautiful classmates, Yuki Yoshimaru, offered him her lunch. This made the other students flock to give their lunch to Ryuuichi until he felt full. Meanwhile, Kotarou had a hard time climbing the stairs. When he was halfway up the stairs, a student accidentally kicked him until he was about to fall. Luckily, Hiroyuki, who was wearing a mask to not be caught by Kotarou, came to the rescue and saved the lunch. Kotarou arrives at Ryuichi's classroom, and Ryuichi is moved by his little brother's efforts. He lied that he hadn't eaten lunch and then invited Kotarou to eat lunch together. At lunch the next day, Yuki was teased by her friends after finding out she likes Ryuichi. They say that she has a serious rival in love, namely Maria. Meanwhile, Maria was passing Ryuichi in the school hallway when Kirin and Kotarou arrived. They asked why Maria never came to the daycare center again, but she scolded them. Even though Maria wants to play with Kotarou and Kirin, she feels embarrassed about Ryuichi. This actually made Kirin misunderstand, thinking Maria hated Ryuichi. Even though Maria had rejected it, Kirin instead asked if she liked Ryuichi, which the other classmates overheard. Maria insists she neither hates nor likes Ryuichi, but Kirin actually has a plan for Maria to like Ryuichi by showing his good sides. Then Kirin asked Kotarou to approach his older brother so that Maria could see that Ryuichi had an affectionate side. Unfortunately, Maria instead comments on how Ryuichi doesn't have a firm attitude. This prompts Kirin to resort to another method, in which she asks Ryuichi to hit her. But instead of Ryuichi, Hayato came to beat Kirin for being a nuisance in class. This brought Kirin to tears, and she ended up telling Ryuichi everything. Maria, who heard that, insisted she had no feelings for Ryuichi and ran out of the classroom in shame. Seeing this, Ryuichi then chased after Maria, who caught the attention of the other classmates. Instead of saying anything romantic to her, he just told her that there was a sticker on Maria's skirt. The scene changed. The next day at the daycare center, Kosuke escorted Takuma. He informed Ryuichi that Kazuma didn't come today because he was sick. At home, Kazuma is being cared for by his mother, Umi, who asks him to take medicine to recover quickly and play with Takuma again. Ryuichi was worried that Takuma would be lonely without Kazuma, but Takuma made sure he was okay. Sure enough, Takuma looked engrossed in playing with the other friends, while Ryuichi was still worried about his condition when he returned to class with Hayato. After waking up from a nap in the afternoon, Takuma looked for Kazuma, who usually slept beside him. He began to feel lonely and left the daycare center. Kotarou saw Takuma come out and followed him. In the schoolyard, Kotarou runs into Ryuichi, who has just finished afternoon class. He informed that Takuma was waiting for Kazuma at the school gate. Fortunately, Umi came with Kazuma, who had recovered at that time. Seeing the arrival of his twin brother, the usually cheerful Takuma burst into tears because he missed Kazuma. The next day at school, Ryuichi gets a love letter tucked away in a locker. This surprised Ryuichi and his friends because apparently, It was the first love letter he had received. After receiving the love letter, Ryuichi becomes unfocused at the daycare center, until Usoida thought he had a fever. Kotarou thought his older brother was sick because at home at dinner, Ryuichi's face turned red. Even though it was because Morinomiya and Saikawa made brown rice to commemorate the day Ryuichi got his first love letter. Before going to bed, Kotarou asks Ryuichi to read him a book, but he ignores him because he is busy daydreaming. The following day, Ryuichi continued to daydream as he walked to school with Kotarou. He doesn't notice that Kotarou sees an orange tree and intends to take the oranges to treat Ryuichi's fever. When Ryuichi woke up from his daydreaming, Kotarou was gone. On the other hand, Maria and Yuki were daydreaming about the love letter Ryuichi had received until they accidentally bumped into each other. At that moment, Ryuichi suddenly grabbed Maria's hand, which took Yuki by surprise. However, Ryuichi apparently asked if Maria had seen Kotarou. After learning that Kotarou is missing, they search for him together. Moments later, they see Kotarou coming with Hayato, who apparently found him in a residence yard. Kotarou approached Ryuichi and handed him the orange he had taken, which made Ryuichi touched. At school, Ryuichi decides to reject the declaration of love from the girl who gave him a love letter. Yuki and Maria heard this, making them worry that he would reject them later. Even so, Maria said that she was relieved to know Ryuichi didn't want to date at this time. Then Yuki asked if Maria wanted to be her friend. Times change, and at Morinomiya's house, Saikawa gets a call from Taka, looking for Kotarou. When Ryuichi picks up the phone, Hayato invites Ryuichi and Kotarou to go to the festival together. Ryuichi then went to Morinomiya to ask permission, and she gave approval on the condition that he did not waste money. Then Ryuichi and Kotarou went to the festival to meet Hayato and Taka. While waiting for them, Hayato tells Taka to be careful because he believes the sword that Taka always carries will be lost at the festival. Taka was stubborn and said that he would never lose the sword. Long story short, Ryuichi and Kotarou came to the festival, looking around with happy hearts. Ryuichi bought Kotarou cotton candy, which he somehow refused to eat. Even so, Ryuichi and Hayato denied Taka and Kotarou's request to play the lottery because it would cost a lot of money. They went back to look around at the festival and will play the game of catching carp, which is guarded by Usaida. But Taka is still crying and insists on playing the lottery. Taka's cries became louder when he found out that the toy sword he was carrying was gone. They went looking for the toy sword but could not find it. Until the afternoon, Hayato gave Taka a choice to continue looking for the sword alone or play the lottery once. With a heavy heart, he chose to play the lottery. But when Taka still decides to pull the strings in the lottery game, Kotarou suddenly pulls one of the threads. Taka was surprised because the thread gave him a very similar sword to his own. It turns out that the lottery seller found Taka's toy sword and finally entered the sword as a prize in the lottery game. During summer vacation, daycare club members with their children and parents go to the beach. Usaida decides to come along even though his goal is not to be a babysitter but to just relax. Arriving at the beach, it turned out that Maria was coming, but the mothers at the daycare club asked her to buy a swimsuit first after finding out that she was going to swim in an ugly sports swimsuit from school. Meanwhile, while the other children were playing, Kotarou looked frightened by the water. Ryuichi several times invited him into the sea, but his little brother was scared. He finally let Kotarou play in the sand on the beach, making him sad because the waves washed his sand mountain away. Ryuichi seemed to have a hard time trying to make Kotarou happy, so he took his little brother to look for shells around the beach. When it was noon, Maria returned wearing a swimsuit, which was sexy enough to make Ryuichi and Hayato gasp. After that, the mothers took their children to nap, including Kotarou, who quickly fell asleep. Seeing that Kotarou was already asleep, Ryuichi went swimming in the sea with Hayato. It turned out that Hayato thought Ryuichi couldn't swim because he had been avoiding the sea. Ryuichi explains that he is trying to make Kotarou happy and not afraid of the beach because they had gone to the beach with their parents before. Kotarou had woken up from sleep and was looking for his older brother. Midori's mother informs him that Ryuichi is swimming, so he follows into the sea. Unfortunately, when Kotarou tried to get into the sea to catch up with Ryuichi, he was thrown by the waves. However, Yukari was quick to save him and immediately called Ryuichi and Hayato. Yukari tells Ryuichi about Kotarou, who is worried that he intends to follow him into the sea. This makes Ryuichi feel even more guilty until he finds a shell and gives it to his little brother. When Kotarou put the shell to his ear, he heard the sound of the sea, which seemed to make him very happy. After returning from the beach, Ryuichi's days were still spent at the daycare center even though it was the middle of summer. Taka suddenly came crying, and despite explaining many times, Ryuichi didn't understand why he was crying so hard. However, Shizuka Kamitani, Taka's mother, and Hayato explained about Hayato, who was angry with him because his young brother had scribbled on his favorite baseball. Taka doesn't seem to feel guilty and blames his brother, who is too busy playing baseball to never play with him. When Morinomiya arrives with Saikawa to help look after Taka and Kotarou, Ryuichi asks permission to go see Hayato. Hayato was practicing baseball that day, although his friends said his aura was very bad, and he looked annoyed. Sure enough, when Ryuichi forced Hayato to speak, he complained about Taka's naughty attitude. Ryuichi tries to make him understand and tells how Kotarou often breaks Ryuichi's belongings, but they are of no value compared to his younger brother. Unfortunately, the story did not calm Hayato and still annoyed him with Taka's misbehavior, which was excessive. Morinomiya scolds Taka for scribbling on his brother's favorite baseball in the daycare center room. Taka, who still doesn't feel guilty, is taught a lesson by Morinomiya, who pretends to break his favorite sword. Seeing this, Taka realized that he was guilty, so when he came home from daycare, he ran after his older brother, who was still ignoring him, to apologize. Hayato forgives his younger brother and invites him to play baseball together tomorrow. After that, the school held a summer festival, and the daycare club would set up a drink stand. Ryuichi and the children were dressed in vegetable costumes, and although the atmosphere was chaotic because they weren't used to carrying trays of drinks, they were all having fun. On that same day, the parents of the daycare center children will come, so Yayoi Kumatsuka has a request for Ryuichi, Usaida, and Hayato. When the fathers of the children came, they welcomed them happily. Finally, a man came to the daycare room and immediately hugged Kirin. The man was apparently Satoru Kumatsuka, Kirin's very protective father. Ryuichi, Usaida, and Hayato introduced themselves, but their appearances were very different because they were all pretending to be girls. Apparently, Satoru is protective and jealous, so he doesn't like it when Yayoi and Kirin are around men. Even though they tried to disguise themselves as women, their cover was immediately exposed to the point that Satoru would take Kirin away from daycare. Satoru is finally convinced by Kirin, who acts sweet and offers him a drink. Seeing Kirin carrying a drinking tray, Satoru was touched and imagined what his daughter would be like when his daughter got married. Satoru's words touched the other fathers, and they burst into tears. On the other hand, Saikawa informed them that Morinomiya couldn't join the festival because of a guest, but she asked for their photo as a keepsake. They all took pictures with so much joy. After that, Hayato and Taka's mother came to tell them about the chicken eggs that had almost hatched in the incubator. They took the daycare children to see the chicken eggs hatch. Ryuichi remembered that the chicks would follow whoever they first saw when they hatched because they would be considered mother and father. This makes the daycare children even more excited to see the eggs hatch. Unfortunately, the chicken eggs in the incubator are not ready to hatch in the laboratory room. Umi says that the eggs will hatch tomorrow and asks them to wait patiently. When they all protested impatiently, only Kotarou seemed intent on waiting for the eggs to hatch. The next day, Kotarou invited Ryuichi to come to the laboratory early in the morning. Fortunately, Umi was already in the laboratory and told them that the eggs were about to hatch. Kotarou waits in front of the incubator, though Ryuichi falls asleep because he's tired of waiting. The chicken eggs actually hatched soon, and Kotarou was pleased. He was even happier now that the chicks were following him, much to Taka's annoyance. The scene changes to the next day at Usaida's house. Usaida calls Ryuichi to tell him he can't come to daycare that day because he's sick. Ryuichi panicked because no one would look after the children while he was in class. Fortunately, Saikawa came and said he would help look after the children while Ryuichi attended school. Even so, Saikawa actually really can't take care of children. Kotarou continues to encourage Saikawa, who gets into trouble when he has to change Midori's diaper. That's when Saikawa called Usaida, saying that Midori was in danger. But before he could explain what kind of danger he was referring to, Saikawa's cell phone was accidentally exposed to water because Taka and Kotarou were trying to help change the diaper. Usaida immediately panicked after getting a call from Saikawa. Previously, he had felt bad about having to leave the kids in daycare and thought they wouldn't miss him. In a state of high heat, Usaida forced himself to go to daycare. However, before arriving at the daycare, he had already fainted on the road. Luckily at that time, Ryuichi and Hayato were in gym class and found Usaida. Together, they brought him to the daycare room after he said that Midori was in danger. In the daycare room, as expected, things were fine. Saikawa explained that the dangerous situation was that he couldn't find a spare diaper for Midori. Usaida is relieved even though he is increasingly convinced that the children don't miss him. But at that time, Taka, Kirin, and all the children came to him and said they were adults and could change their own diapers. They looked so cheerful when they asked him to rest and not worry about them. Only Midori looked sad and crawled over to Usaida. It was then that Midori unexpectedly called out Usaida's name, which was the first word she could utter. The next scene shows Yuki secretly trying to pick up a ball that fell under the daycare club room window. She didn't want to be caught by Ryuichi, so it would be considered a peep. But unfortunately, Yuki is still caught by Takuma, who thinks they are playing hide and seek. She immediately hides when Ryuichi looks for her, but she is caught by Maria, who reprimands Yuki for peeking at the daycare. Maria misunderstood and thought Yuki wanted to play in the daycare but was scared, just like her. Until finally, she forced Yuki to come to daycare. In the daycare room, the children seem to like Yuki, but she is still afraid and awkward toward them. Usaida finally suggested that they take a walk to become closer. Ryuichi asked Yuki to join Kotarou as they toured the school, but when Kotarou's snot came out of his nose, Yuki was disgusted when she was about to clean. She panics when the children pass the worm into her hand, making her unconscious. When she wakes up in the school's clinic, Yuki already feels that she will not fit in with the children. But Ryuichi, waiting for Yuki, reassured her that she was just not used to it. At that time, Usaida came with the children, who wanted to apologize and give flowers to Yuki. Yuki forgives them, but she realizes that Maria is not with Usaida and the children. Ryuichi said that Maria might have gone home, so Yuki ran and followed Maria to thank her for being invited to the daycare. On weekends, friends call Ryuichi to take him to the movies. At first, Ryuichi refuses because he has to look after Kotarou, but Saikawa insists that Ryuichi needs to socialize, so he offered to take care of Kotarou that day. Ryuichi finally met his friends even though he still had a little thought about his younger brother at home. Especially when he saw Hayato coming with a bite mark on his cheek because Taka forced him to come along. Ryuichi became even more guilty that Kotarou was not angry at being left alone. At home, Saikawa tries to cheer up Kotarou and invites him to play. While playing toss the ball he had drawn with Ryuichi's face, Kotarou stumbled upon a library. The library apparently belongs to Morinomiya's late son who has died. Then Kotarou found a book and asked Saikawa to read it. It was then that Morinomiya had just come and saw the shadows of Saikawa and Kotarou reading a book. She remembered her son, who had died. When December arrived, the city seemed to be ready for Christmas. There are already many Christmas trees and statues of Santa Claus decorations. Kotarou seems to really like Christmas tree decorations as well as Santa Claus. It's to the point that Ryuichi and Kotarou are late for daycare because Kotarou keeps looking at Santa Claus's decorations on the streets. Arriving at the daycare, Ryuichi tells Usaida about Kotarou's obsession with Santa Claus. Taka, who heard this, said he had met Santa Claus at the toy shop, which immediately made Kotarou want to meet Santa Claus. A few days later, Ryuichi is increasingly determined to become Santa Claus, but he doesn't know how. While trying to bulge his stomach by tucking some clothes under his gym shirt, his classmates catch Ryuichi, forcing him to tell him about his intentions. They try to help by looking for Santa Claus costumes online because apparently Ryuichi's cell phone is broken. At that time, Hayato suddenly said he would skip class, and he went to the head of the academy's room. Christmas Day arrived. Saikawa had already cooked a lot of food for them for dinner. Unfortunately, he said that Morinomiya couldn't come for dinner together, so there would only be Ryuichi and Kotarou. Kotarou looks lonely, having to spend Christmas alone with his older brother. So Ryuichi was even more insistent on being able to secretly change into a Santa Claus costume. When he sneaked into the bathroom, Kotarou followed him, which made Ryuichi unable to change clothes. Just then, the doorbell rang, so Ryuichi and Kotarou together opened the door. It turned out that behind the door were their friends, including the parents and daycare kids. Morinomiya suddenly comes to give Ryuichi a new cell phone for Christmas. Even one of his friends came wearing a Santa Claus costume, which made Kotarou very happy. After that, they ate together. And the school babysitters closed with a photo of them in front of the Christmas tree. The moral that can be learned from this anime series is love from a brother who is willing to do everything for the happiness of his little brother.